Welcome to our discussion on how to build your AI roadmap for 2024. I'm Corey Wilkerson. I lead our core engineering group here at Retool, and joining me is Rochelle Palmer. Hello, Rochelle.
Hello.
Director at MongoDB, responsible for developer experience and developer education. So the conversation today will go like this. So we'll talk about what Retool has learned and what we've learned in the recent State of AI survey, some of the trends and takeaways that came out of that survey. We'll get some thoughts from Rochelle and her experience on executing on the Mongo AI roadmap, as well as some lessons learned along the way. And then finally, we'll talk about how to build your own AI roadmap, right? Where to start and where to invest in order to grow your maturity. So we'll save 10 minutes at the end for a live Q&A. And if you've got any questions that come up, please post them in the chat. And I see we already have a lively chat. That's great to see. Bottom right-hand corner of your screen if you haven't seen it yet. And this session is being recorded. You'll get an email with the recording after we wrap up. Rochelle, are you ready?
Yes, I am ready for this.
All right, let's do it. So first up, let's get some framing around kind of where we are with AI, right? And how it's showing up in the workplace. So if we look at Retool's recent State of AI data, right, it suggests that the C-suite and ICs both consider AI to be fairly rated, right? So at this point, and the adoption curve for me, maybe you'd expect to see, or I expected to see maybe inflated expectations, right? Like overrated, and maybe some disappointment starting to show. But it feels like the data says that, AI is delivering. So we're seeing this optimistic response when maybe I would expect to see some cynicism. Why do you think folks are clustered around fairly rated?
Sure. So I think developers are inherently a skeptical group of people. Maybe we've all been burned too many times by the snake oil. You can insert your favorite meme about the cloud is just a bunch of Linux servers. But I myself, as a user of AI, have been really impressed by the applicability and how helpful it can be in my day-to-day as a product leader. And as a person who's a builder too. And so while it has its drawbacks, I think many developers are actually playing around with these tools and seeing like the value that they bring. So I would say that, we are definitely in the hype cycle, but it also is fulfilling at least some of its promises.
Totally. I kind of feel like some of that hype is just going to sustain forever. Like I kind of waited for it to taper off a little bit, but as an engineer, I feel like I have access to a new set of primitives, right? Like it's something I can really build with out here. And it's been, I think, a ton of fun. And I'm guessing the folks on this call mostly agree. If we're here to learn about AI, I'm guessing we're all on kind of the same page.
Right.
But looking forward, maybe, right? So like, let's cast this forward maybe a year out from now. Do you think like disappointment kind of looms out there, right? Are we going to be like, do we finally kind of crash into the trough of disillusionment? Or do you think it just continues to get, better and better from here?
Maybe it'll die down a little bit. It's hard to say just because right now the pace of innovation is so rapid. So right now keeping up with everything that's new is sort of draining. So I feel like it would be nice if there was a little bit of slowdown in the innovation. We don't want to have our downfall by the robot overlords too soon. But I also feel like, as we sort of consolidate around tech stacks and sort of best of breed solutions, we're probably going to have a lot more like vetted solutions in the space, as opposed to like just everybody's trying everything right now to see what sticks. So I think probably the disillusionment aspect will go away and it will just seem like a normal part of the tech stack for a lot of folks.
Yeah,
right?
for sure. Yeah, I agree.
Just be another framework that you use.
You have to graduate into like, in a few years from now, we're going to be like, well, sure, that's part of the standard toolkit of like how we build things.
Yep.
Yeah, I've had a similar kind of reaction to that. All right. So, when I think about, looking inside of it, you were mentioning like a lot of like the pace of innovation is kind of rapid right now. And like maybe a little bit of fatigue there, right? Like our AI channel inside of our internal Slack at Retool is just like a constant stream of like, this is happening and this is happening. And it's kind of hard to keep up.
Right.
So there's clearly a ton of energy and enthusiasm in this space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere I look, from Slack to Twitter to Hacker News to New York Times, right? AI is just like such a dominant story. I think it was the most recent issue of the New Yorker that showed up at our house. So looking internally, right? So looking internal to Mongo, when you see that kind of enthusiasm, How do you harness that enthusiasm and turn it into something productive for your organization?
Yeah. So getting started, we knew pretty immediately that there's a lot of internal demand, there's a lot of internal interest, there's tinkering happening. So what we did to sort of channel that energy and interest was to hold a series of hackathons. So we already have that culture at MongoDB. We've always had them. I've been at MongoDB for 10 years. We've always had these hackathons. They're an annual thing. But we had also themed hackathons for teams where the entire engineering org could participate. And this is important not just for invention and idea generation and vetting, but also for learning, right?
Got it. So kind of broad org support for this hackathon model, and then we show up, post ChatGPT launch, and we're like, let's do the AI theme, right? Just like whole team kind of part of that shipping prototype AI work.
Yep.
Got it. All right. So maybe, something similar again in Retool, and I think many companies have probably saw a similar model, like so much excitement around this. Like, how do we shape this into something real? So talk to me a bit. I think in some of our earlier conversations, you'd previewed this idea of like enablement teams inside of Mongo, right? So instead of this like decentralized approach where you had 1,000 different teams doing 1,000 different things, you decided that you would have this platform kind of function inside of Mongo. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, first of all, we've identified the interest. We've given, we want to give people some time to learn and to generate ideas and to bubble up those ideas. But we also pretty immediately knew that, corralling that interest is important. And also, I think probably more important is cataloging the interest, right? So if somebody has a really great idea and they say it to just the person who sits next to them, and then no one else ever really hears about it, it's a lost opportunity. So what we wanted to be able to do was generate a catalog of ideas and then quickly sort of vet those and then give the engineers the tools they need to make those ideas maybe happen or make those ideas kind of be proven to be not feasible, right? So we created this MLAI function inside of our dev prod team, and their job became to set up the sandboxes, get the API keys, maintain the central roster of AI ML projects, and who's in charge or the DRI, directly responsible individual for that project. And that way we could start monitoring, not intervene, not saying yes or no, not any kind of gatekeeping, but just sort of make it so that you don't have to use your personal credit card. You can just put your name on this list, and we have a team who will help you make it happen. So just kind of organizing a little bit of the effort.
Got it. So it's just like, we'll give you the tools. You have the agency. You run with the ideas in the hackathon forum, right? Explore these things, but there's a little bit of policy, maybe governance, and a little bit of equipping or enabling teams to run with AI.
Yes. And I think it's important to state, actually, that team existed before we even had a policy, right? Because we were still in the process of pondering, what does this mean? How will these tools even be used? What kind of ideas are there around how to use them before we could say, let's make a policy about what the use is. Right?
Got it. Yes, that totally makes sense, right? Just let's see what's out there, and then we'll talk about how do we actually want to kind of govern this internally to the org. I think that's something that we'll pull out of this conversation later, is just governance and policy is probably an important step as you're thinking about your roadmap internally.
Yeah.
All right. So kind of coming out of the lab. So hackathon is, in my mind, just a bit of a lab, let's explore and kind of see where things go. And now maybe into practice, right? So tell us how is AI impacting both product and engineering today inside of Mongo, both in the product catalog and maybe in day-to-day internal use. So more the applied side versus the exploratory side.
Yeah. So on the external side in the product catalog, we are a database company. I'm assuming everyone on the call knows that at this point. So we added a vector database capability into MongoDB. So essentially, you can pull down content and you put it in a MongoDB vector database. Fine. We also added AI ML capability into our technical documentation. So there's a new AI ML chatbot, RAG application, which is open source in our docs. And then we also augmented our experiences in our Compass product, which is a database GUI, and in our Charts product, which is a data visualization tool. So that's sort of like external facing. And then on the inside, our day-to-day internal use is mostly in terms of assistance tooling and service, right? So we have built-in knowledge seeking and answer services for our support team in progress, which is a work in progress, our sales team, which is a work in progress, and then other enablement resources, which we're currently like sort of in the proofing and development phases right now.
Awesome. It sounds like AI is kind of reaching all parts of the org. So into the core product, right? So strong database foundations with Mongo, and this feels like a natural kind of evolution of some of that work or an extension to some of that work.
Right.
And then, of course, also just kind of, pervasive in the org and like how we build things these days. We're starting to really see AI show up. All right. So we talked about, you mentioned vector databases for a second. And I realize some folks on this call might not be intimately familiar with vector databases. I've got a kind of an insider's question I want to ask about VectorDBs in a second. But before we do that, can we just frame quickly, like what is this concept?
Yeah, sure. So the vector database is basically, if you're going to build something like a RAG application on top of it, for instance, you would take your own data source. So let me give an example that most people would understand. Like, let's say you're building a product and you have a technical documentation doc set. So you might take that documentation, you would put it into a vector database, and alongside your data, you would actually store vectors around the words in each line of the document, right? And so using that, you can augment OpenAI and ChatGPT to answer questions about that documentation. Now, you don't have to do your technical documentation. That could be anything.
Sure.
So
when we say so vectors themselves are just encodings of data, right? It's like a mathematical encoding of data, right? And it land in some sort of like vector space, and then you can do like a similar sort of thing. Like maybe we should just talk about RAG quickly, and then I'll come back to my RAG quickly, and then we can come back to my insider's question that I want to ask.
Yes.
But the RAG concept is, kind of walk me through that one more time, just so I can make sure I've got it clear.
Okay. So the basic idea for the RAG retrieval augmented generation architecture, for those of you who don't know what the RAG means yet, the basic idea is whenever your user inputs a query, before the AI responds to you, you look up information similar to the query and then pass both the content that you retrieved and the query to AI. So you give the AI the info it needs to generate an answer back, and this minimizes the risk of hallucinations. So let's say you came up with a new product last week, right? So if you are using ChatGPT, you can ask ChatGPT and you can see that right now it has no idea that your new product exists because the web hasn't been scraped effectively yet in totality to know that your new product exists. But if you have your own database with your technical documentation or with your marketing content or whatever, with your own vector search, you can pass this question about your new product along with your pieces of content about the new product to OpenAI and ChatGPT, and the likelihood that you'll get the correct answer dramatically increases, right?
Right on. So we're kind of extending the brain a little bit with a new
Correct.
set of information. Right on.
Or a
It's funny,
curated set of information.
I feel like OpenAI and ChatGPT are kind of becoming the Xerox or Kleenex, right? Like we just say those things when we mean like it could be a limited number of parts. Yeah. I don't know why.
Unlimited number of parts. Yes.
Yeah. Right on. All right. So the insider's question is I was thinking back to like maybe 2016 or 2017 inside of GitHub, and we were talking about word2vec and code2vec at the time, right? Like vectors, and I think if you've got a data science and Python background, vectors aren't like a new concept. They're not a new thing. Why suddenly I feel like it just like kind of dominates the AI story. So what happened here?
Yeah, no, you're right. It's not new. AI/ML is not new. Being able to do this is not new. I think probably what changed was accessibility. So like if you want everyone to be able to do a thing, you need to have a couple of key components, right? You need to have applicability, right? You have to have practical use cases that are actually somewhat obvious to everyone. And then you have to have low friction getting started. And then you have to have affordability, right? So like if, I have a server rack in my garage, but like I don't necessarily want to set up my own LLM. I'm not sure those servers could even handle it because they're covered in cobwebs. But like you have to be able to like immediately see the value and demonstrate the value, right? So even as developers who are working in a day-to-day, like even if say you found something cool or interesting and you want to tinker away, but then you still have to demonstrate it to like the management tier and say like, hey, this is how it can help us. And maybe sometimes that's just a bridge too far. And I think what OpenAI really did was it put it right in your face of like, hey, you can chat to this thing and it knows the answers. And so immediately the question became, okay, well, how do they do that? And how can we do that with information that, you know, we have, or taking information from different parts of the web and like combining it into new and different things, right? Whether that's like on code bases or on technical documentation or other domain expertise specific documentation.
Got it. Yeah. So it's like, it was almost just like the interfaces were right. And like maybe the distribution mechanism and just the immediacy of the, like, it's just like there and it's ready.
And the interface was really very clean, right? So it was like a worldwide proof of concept.
Yeah, agreed.
All at the same time, where the more people who used it, the more it was like, oh, we should have one of these.
Nice. All right, so turning back into the sort of inside story at Mongo just a little bit, and I think this is probably part of the, you know, the sort of like AI function and discipline as you're thinking about maturity in your organization and like how you kind of want to grow up in terms of your AI skills. I would imagine there's probably a strong culture of dog fooding inside of Mongo, right? So you've shipped these products, right? You're just like, well, here's our new product catalog that is AI equipped. As someone that's building, you know, vector technology or AI applications, how are y'all using this stuff kind of internally to like, you know, to validate, to dog food, or I think you know, we say drink your own champagne sort of thing?
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, I can speak for myself, right? So I'd made a joke saying that like the person I talk to most often right now is my ChatGPT. But that's for mostly research, right? So I use it for research in my day-to-day. Like if I'm quickly looking for like the history of, say, a company like Sybase, I can read Wikipedia, or I can just ask ChatGPT to sort of summarize it and then ask it very targeted, pointed questions that saves me from reading like maybe 40 distinct articles about it. And so, you know, that's how I would say like the use is. Now I'm asking the internet, but you could be asking something that's very specific, internal only documentation for you. Of course, you want to be mindful of like what you're sharing with you know, our friends at
Sure.
But as far as like otherwise dog fooding it, we have a strong culture of using our products, right? So like inside of MongoDB, we use our products for like demos and POCs. We use our own products to like store our own data about customers. So I would say that's sort of the expectation all the time. And so our docs chatbot does use our own vector.
Yeah. Right on. Yeah. I think here in a second we'll talk about maybe testing and how we get these things out to market and how you all kind of explored some of that as well. So yeah, we'll get to that. It's interesting too, because I think you hinted a bit at kind of privacy concerns there a little bit as well, which also I would say is part of when you're thinking about these things, privacy is going to be a big part of the story, right? There's certain things that you probably don't want to leave the four walls of your company and share with you know, a provider that maybe you don't have an agreement with. So we can talk about that a little bit too. But let's move on to the next question I have here, which is just like, you know, you're probably seeing a lot from your vantage point right now, right? You bring this stuff out to market and talk to customers, et cetera. What are some novel or interesting applications you're seeing that maybe aren't so obvious to the everyday consumer?
Yeah, and I have new data since we talked yesterday even about this, which was we had done our own survey to customers, and only really 10% know what they're doing. The rest just want to do something. So if you
Early days,
that group of people who don't know what to do yet, you will want to get out your pen and I will give you a list of potential use cases right now. So the first one that's perhaps the most obvious is external facing chatbots for your support function or for docs searching functions. If you have a complex product, we have 45,000 plus pages of documentation. Finding stuff in it is, you know, needle in a haystack sometimes. So chatbot. Internal service desks from your wiki information, corporate policy docs, helping with HR related things. There's also really cool summarization capabilities in terms of release note generation from your code, or even what I would call fancy release notes, which is sort of like, here's the feature, here's the code, here's why it's cool. And you can use this for drafting things like product and content marketing drafts around feature releases, internal or external press releases. I also have seen recently an incredible startup that creates your entire set of like requirements documentation for an engineering project. So you give it an idea in a high level terms, and it says, okay, you need this front end, you need this tech stack, you need these sort of like essential set of scope documents are created for your services. And it's really cool. Now, it's a draft, right? So you need someone to review it all and like flesh it out more. But on first pass, like as a product person, I'm like, oh, this is what's coming for my job. But it definitely would give your engineering people enough to get started with, right? To get the idea. So
yeah, awesome.
I thought it was really cool.
The accelerant, right? Just kind of like moves you down the path.
It doesn't do it all for you.
Right. All right, so let's move back. If we look at the I'm going to go back to the state of AI data for a moment. An interesting stat in that, and I think you just kind of referenced a little bit of this, is that 20% of our respondents in that survey said they haven't yet started adopting AI, right? While 30% know that they're getting the basics of AI in place, right? So still early days. Although I think you pointed out 20% or 30% is a relatively big number.
Mm-hmm.
As you look at how AI is being formalized or operationalized inside of Mongo today, so what are you're fairly far down this path, right? What are a few key learnings that you'd like to share as folks that are, for this audience, for this cohort that's maybe just getting started? So the idea is like, how can we save folks some cycles?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I do think, I'm obviously as somebody from like the kind of engineering background, I don't like to be told no. That's why I want to be able to build stuff. But I do think it's important to have a policy, because it is a Wild West. And pretty immediately, like whether you know it or not, people will start sharing data with these tools to like make their lives and jobs easier. So you're going to want a policy at your company about how you can and can't use AI and what kind of information you can and can't share. I think that's very
important. Yeah, that sounds like a concrete
immediately actionable.
Do this thing, right? Got it.
The legal teams celebrate everywhere. So I'm giving them a shout out. The second thing is, I do think it was really important and key to have this sort of machine learning ops team, so that you can track costs and adoption and use cases and ideas within your organization. Because you don't want good ideas to die, and you also don't want bad ideas to flourish too much, right? So you want to know what's happening. And then, I really do think that the hackathon was a great way for us to sort of see some of these proofs of what things could do. But it also was important for us to give time to our engineers away from their normal day-to-day to learn this technology and see how it could impact them. And that was done like in a massive scale, like giving everybody that week or 2 weeks of time. That brings a lot of innovative ideas to the table. The other thing I think I could say about it is that, if you can build a working POC in a week, you get an idea for how long it might take you to have something polished, whether that's something that's external facing or something that's internal facing, to save your various teams time. If you can have that time to do the POC, you can get a real grasp on the level of effort and what kind of resources you need. So I think
I'm curious when you like, and this isn't something we talked about before, but I'm curious in the output of the hackathon, for instance, like how, like the distribution between like internal facing stuff, like let's accelerate the team, versus like external, like let's get this in the product. Like what did that distribution look like?
Maybe it was an even split. Actually, maybe it was a little bit more internal facing improvements. Some of it was just sort of like, there's like very, you have the things that are sort of like immediate utility type of stuff, which are like, oh, that's obvious. And then you have the other kind of projects, which are kind of just wild ideation to prove a thing is possible. Or like refinements that we could commit to open source was a kind of a category that's like a little bit different. So that's external facing, but it's not necessarily our products, right?
Got it.
So
Okay.
I guess I would probably say it's a near even split, maybe a little bit heavier on internal.
Got it. Well, you've got some, I would imagine, empathy for your day-to-day work, right? Just like, how can I make
Mhm.
my job a little bit easier so I can be more productive on the other side?
Totally,
Totally,
yeah.
totally makes sense. All right. So you mentioned a bit around kind of cost management too, which is maybe something that I would highlight here, and something that, we wanted to pay attention to inside of Retool, right? You don't want to just hand everyone your keys and say, run hard on Anthropic or OpenAI or whatever. So when
Yeah.
you're thinking about costs, right, it's probably another bullet point we want to extract here for folks, just like the trade-offs between the letting folks just run and play versus managing your actual expenses here. Any notes you want to share on that?
Yes. So hypothetically, if I wanted to, this weekend, I could set up a really cool front end React website about my new AI company that sells you chatbots. And hypothetically, I could just buy the mailing list of people in your company. Why am I telling you this? Because this is totally happening right now. So there's a whole fleet of people worldwide who are creating AI startups that do essentially RAG applications, and very simple, fairly naive RAG applications, and they're currently selling them in mass to the business sides of our organizations, right? And I'll give you an example. One external vendor came, sold us pretty hard. They wanted $250,000, and then they wanted a per interaction fee, right, of $2.
Okay.
And so from our own POCing and from our own work, we knew that the cost was 0.006 per interaction. And so it was like, wow, this is kind of out of control, man.
Yeah.
And so I do think the AI like solution space, or like the AI solutions being shopped to our companies are like really extremely high priced. And if you're not an engineer or you haven't done that sort of qualification, so you know how much level of effort this is, it's very tempting to be like, oh, well, like maybe that's not that much. Maybe it's so fancy, right? Seems so fancy, seems so complicated, but actually I assure you, for RAG apps, if you are a developer who, has a year of experience, you could probably build yourself something in a weekend. So like, don't immediately fall for the cash grab.
Got it. Yes, yeah. Totally understood. I would also say for folks building systems with AI internally today, think about abuse, think about throttling, think about those kinds of things, just general platform health, right? Like these things can have runaway costs associated with them if you're not kind of paying close attention.
Yeah, that's true too. You can also cache answers. So if you have answers that are frequently asked of your chatbot, you can cache the question and the answer so that you don't pay every single time people ask the same question.
For sure. Yes, indeed.
So there's optimizations you can make there too to make it even less than what you think it will be off of the cuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. These models, presumably, as we see more competition, et cetera, and more optimization and tuning over time, I think the cost structure kind of comes down.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, some of these things aren't cheap, and I think it's smart to put hear me out, put that on the list of things that you should be concerned about when you're building with AI.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So again, looking at the Retool state of AI data, accuracy and security sit near the top of our respondents' concerns, right? Outpacing things like cost and performance. So we just talked about cost, but you really hear from our folks like accuracy, security, flashing red lights here. And you mentioned hallucination earlier, right? It's a popular topic here.
Mm-hmm.
How is this showing up? How are these concerns maybe showing up in your customer conversations? And how are you seeing the industry grapple with these problems?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say like this is absolutely real. These are real. I have been able to make my ChatGPT like hallucinate things very easily with a single question. So there are ways that you can minimize this, but I don't think it should be downplayed. And so this can be for non-technical questions. It can be for questions where you ask for an explicit reference. So like, for instance, tell me the answer and tell me the URL where you got that answer from. It can make up both the response and the people who said it and the URL. So you have to fact check, right? So you have to be incredibly thorough when you're doing testing before you go live of something, of any of them, right? And then make efforts to minimize the hallucination.
Yeah, I think we'll actually hit that here in a second too. I wanted to ask you about, when you bring AI product to market, some things you should be concerned about. But before we get to that, when you maybe some use cases where you're seeing, like, you talk to a customer, you're kind of seeing their mental calculus about how should I evaluate hallucination and accuracy risk in this model, right? Another thing that I think folks here need to hear and be concerned about when they're building these things, right? I think an example maybe you shared yesterday was like, hey, if you're working on medicine, right, like maybe be very concerned about these things. But if
Yes.
you're building a fun app that sparkles everyone for saying hello, maybe be less concerned, right?
Right.
Can you kind of walk me through some of that?
Yeah. So the use case is key. Sometimes when you're given wrong information, it's fine. And sometimes not so fine. There's that point. The other point is a thing that, like, I think, we can inherently understand, which is that, like, don't minimize domain expertise, right? So if you are that person who is an engineer who's building something like this for, say, a medical startup where you are giving healthcare advice, the answers need to be vetted by somebody who has experience in that domain. It's not enough at all to have your engineers merely pass an eye over the, like, okay, the person asked a question, did they get a response, and was it in that amount of time? Like, that is not enough, right? So what we have done is have the people who have that domain expertise really literally check every Q&A, right? And make sure it's accurate, and then follow up manually for a period of time before go live, right? So this is part of red teaming, which we're going to talk a little more about.
Yeah, I think it's funny because, like, as an engineer, like, when you play with these tools and you're like, the first pass, you put something in and something relatively cogent or coherent comes out on the other side, you're like, whoa, we've got a thing. Maybe I should just, like, ship this, right?
Yeah.
But I think you're right. Like, if it's restaurant recommendations, possibly that's an okay outcome. But if it's medicine, check your enthusiasm.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Don't be the ship it squirrel. Yeah, I mean, we at early days, we were seeing like as many as a third come back with some variant of wrongness. So we had to manually tweak those and sort of like go through again, like how our embeddings are done.
Do you want to dig into that though? So just like, there's a question I had just around, where you're bringing these products to market, what are the tips you have for getting it right? Like, and I think that's maybe you're previewing some of that now, but talk to me through, like, when you saw these accuracy issues, like, how did you bring expertise into it? How did you nail it? How did you get it right? And how did you make sure you reached production with a product that was, delivering on the accuracy side of what was important to you?
Right. So let's talk about the Docs chatbot, for example, and I'll give you some of the very specific things that we did. So first of all, our Docs chatbot, we know how people get to our docs. So we know what the top 250 keywords are that bring people to our documentation pages. So we checked all 250 of those manually, which is like, I'm asking a question about vector search. Does the answer come back? Is it completely correct? Okay, so that's external 250. Then we checked our top 250 inside of our documentation. So if I just ask the same question that people are asking in the day-to-day, is the response exactly what's expected, right? So that was an example. We also did red teaming. Red teaming is, sort of, if you're not familiar, like normally in engineering, you have sort of like unit tests, you have integration tests, right? Red teaming is like you just invite all the people to just throw stuff at it. And so that is what we did. We had over 50 people who were like product and engineers and documentation people who were just asking any question. You can ask it a question about the docs. You could ask it a question about watermelons. It doesn't really matter. We want to see what happens, right? And that's sort of the point. And then we were mentally cataloging how many people we had. And anytime the answer was even slightly off, that was manually followed up upon. So that's the first thing, is the red teaming. We also did sort of this phase rollout approach, right? Where you do, alpha, you do beta, you do private previews.
Yeah, for sure.
But we also, like, you'll notice if you want to go check right now, like, it's not on every page, right? So first of all, we want to get a feel for cost at scale, but we decided to implement the chatbot on one page.
Yeah.
It's a high traffic page. So we want to see how many people who come to that inbound, who come to the page will actually use it. It's about 15% from within the first week. It was about 15% of people.
Sure. Yeah.
And then we want to see every single interaction. And we added like this sort of thumbs up, thumbs down And then we all, that way we can manually follow up on any time when somebody asks a question and gets an answer and they don't feel like it's a good answer or they didn't have a good experience. We follow up on every single one of those. That's not doable if you implement it in this sort of en masse, like, let's just deploy it
everywhere.
To people. Yeah. So that was our sort of, that was
throttle, basically. Yeah,
throttle is like a limited implementation at first, and then what we'll do is as we are seeing what the results of that are, then we expand and expand and expand.
You shared a note that I thought was interesting around just a maxim of like, be fast but be paranoid. I really like that framing. I like, get it out there, learn, see where it goes, but like maybe also throttle things a little bit. Be careful.
Right, exactly.
All right, let's move on to the data. So I feel we're kind of like, I feel like orbiting around the data thing right now, right? Like if you look at LLMs, right, they require this enormous amount of data work, acquisition and wrangling as part of the development and training process, right? And as a consequence, we often see issues with data freshness, and we talked about how to compensate for that earlier with your RAG search, right? Like grab your stuff, hand it to the LLM, and say, interpret this for me. But data accuracy problems aren't just a LLM issue, right? And so when you think about data quality generally, what are some issues you're seeing, or some hidden, maybe some hidden challenges with data quality that you've seen as you've built some of these tools?
Yeah. So, okay. So around data quality, like one of the first things that we noticed is like sometimes when we thought the answer was wrong or suboptimal, and we tracked down where it's referencing that data from, it turned out that our source data was wrong. So this is just an amplification of your garbage in problem, right? And so, I think like kind of a meta comment about like our future world for our future selves is that like these, we wrote the documentation for people, right? We write websites, we write our blogs for people. We don't really write them for the machines to consume and then summarize and then spit out somewhere else. And then the machines are also, so there's that problem, which is like inaccuracies in your documentation. And for MongoDB, when we discover one of these, we can actually quickly fix it. So like, it's fine, but like, you can't really do that with the internet at large per se. And then the other thing is like, we talked about domain expertise. So like, if you do get the wrong answers, someone has to know it's wrong, and then someone has to be able to fix that. So that requires the domain expertise, which is the challenging problem to solve. And then the other piece is that you need to be able to do that analysis, right? So I think a lot of times when we roll a product out, we roll it out and then people are like, yay. And then it's sort of like, oh, well, how many people are using it? Or what are people asking? Or, like what's our net promoter score for our product, right? None of that. No, you can't do this. You have to actually have that from literally day one. So your first level delivery of your minimum viable product for these should include, for a chatbot, for instance, you want to know what is the question being asked, what is the answer being given, and whether or not the user felt like that answer was accurate. That needs to be part of your first pass for minimum viable product.
Totally, right. You hear a lot about like evals right now, right? Like in the AI space, and just like, can we actually evaluate the output in an automated way? Can we actually evaluate the output that we're seeing here is the one that we expect to see? Also, really interesting note on the content piece, and just how like we write for humans, right? Like a doc site, for instance, is written for a certain type of audience. And now we're asking maybe a slightly different profile to understand that data. It'll be interesting to see, like, do we write separate pieces of content over time? Like, do you write, like, does it change maybe how you author something? I don't know. We'll see kind of where that goes.
Well, and I think it's also important to say, like, we've had some ideas about how you can improve this loop, which I'm happy to share, which is sort of like, if you take your question being answered and then you have your response and then you give it to the user, that's fine. That's a decent loop, and your level of accuracy is what it is, right? So you'll have to test that out depending on your doc set of what it is, right? But you can also do this extra sort of step where, let's say you ask the question, you give the answer, and then you take the answer and feed it back again and say, what kind of question might this person be asking in order to get this answer? And then if you have a double match, then you know that that answer is safe and good and credible. So just building some of those loops in your prompt engineering can actually like really improve your accuracy rates of what you suggest to people. So that's,
yeah, it's been really interesting to watch. Like we've been tinkering with a language inside of Retool called ToolScript recently, and just like we're trying to get to this place where you can generate applications with, some natural language input. And it's been really interesting to watch these practices like you're referencing here kind of evolve, like state of the art with like, how do you get these things to do what you want them to do and then verify that it's correct? It's been really kind of interesting to watch that work happen. It's happening right now in real time. Like, we've got the core primitives and then, new layers of abstraction being built on top. It's just kind of a fascinating time to.
Yeah. And even then, like, it's still not going to be 100% accurate. But that being said, like none of the code I ever wrote was 100% accurate either. So let's not be too harsh.
That's funny. All right. So, pulling some lessons learned out of this, I just want to recap quickly kind of some of the points that I think were, we covered here. I think first we just said, we're on to something, obviously, right? I don't think that's news to anyone on this call, right? There might be a lot of hype, but the application is, very real. The utility here is very real, and, we're seeing some real value. We're all shipping product, right? Like, I think we're all just like, let's do this. Like, we didn't just wait forever and see if this thing actually was real. We're doing it. Like, these things are live now. You can go pull down the chatbot off of GitHub and you're up and running, right? You mentioned that hackathons were a great way to harness energy, and I agreed. Like, we saw some really good output from that inside of Retool, right? But it felt like you were saying like enablement was a key piece of that, which that's a good takeaway, I think, for this group. The accuracy and security considerations are very real, and I would throw privacy into that as well, right? I think you put it well in the sense that there are trade-offs, right? You need to be aware of what you're potentially getting into. We talked about the medicine or the medical example versus maybe a restaurant or a more novel kind of fun application. I really loved your emphasis on, domain expertise, right? Just like how you bring that to bear. Like, not all these problems can just be automated away. Like, you're going to need humans in the loop to verify, right? And like, you've got to find your experts. You've got to bring your experts to this problem for the most critical stuff. And I thought that was that made a ton of sense. I think the word you used the other day was meticulous, and I love that word. We talked about testing and red teaming. I think I see a question in the chat about red teaming, which we'll get to in a second. Phased rollouts being another important part of this, right? So let's start with friends and family, internal staff or something, and then we'll take it out to larger and larger audiences. And then we hit on policy and governance considerations, and a reminder to stay aware of costs. So is there anything in that list that, it feels like I'm missing or that I didn't pull out of the conversation, or anything you want to underscore and be like, hell yes, that's a great point. Let's double down on that one.
I did think of something while you were reading it off that I forgot to say, which is about the data freshness and but also retention, right? If you are like us, if you are going to store what was asked and what was responded, you don't want to keep that indefinitely for reasons, right? Not just because it cost you some money on a AWS instance, but probably also because you don't want to keep it. And so you will probably also, in addition to refreshing your data source, right? If you are doing a chatbot on your documentation, for instance, and you have quarterly releases, then you shouldn't have a chatbot that's working off of one-year-old docs, right? So you're going to want to refresh your data source, and you're also going to want to throw away all the interactions that you had in a period of time, right? So for us, we're very aggressive with our throwaway policy, so that limits the ability of it to learn, for instance.
Sure, that totally makes sense. Yeah, we talked about this too with just kind of models generally. Like if you've been using ChatGPT recently, you'll notice that responses are changing over time, right? Say put the same question in, you're going to get different data out, which I think has been an interesting phenomenon. And says something about, like, I know you can pin to versions over API calls, et cetera, but maybe something else to stay aware of is that these actual models are under constant development, and you can't make assumptions about how they will perform going forward. So it feels like kind of that test scaffolding is eval scaffolding is maybe a very important part of these solutions.
And we are evolving, like on our own chatbot, we're evolving our data sources. So like originally it was only the docs, right? And then now it's like the docs plus our transcripts of learning plus like the docs from some of our partners like Mongoose, right? Which is an ORM for MongoDB, plus like some other stuff. But it's certainly not, let's take every page we've ever written and just slam it in there.
Right.
You don't want to do that either. So you want to curate. If you're going to do the RAG application as your first pass use case, which I think is maybe the easiest and has the most obvious applicability, like you're going to want to have a curated data source.
Got it.
You probably also have a fairly aggressive idea about like how often you refresh that data.
Right. Shout out to Mongoose. Love that name. Fantastic name for a project.
Yeah.
All right. So that concludes our formal Q&A. Thanks, Rochelle. And let's hop into a few questions that I saw pop up here in the chat. We'll get through 2 or 3 of these, and then we'll call it a day. So the first question here that I'd love to hear your thoughts on are, for companies starting out. This is from Marcel. Thanks for the question, Marcel. For a company starting out, should AI projects be treated as pure investment experience with no initial expectation of profit or minimizing initial costs, and only investing maybe further once clear business value emerges? So I don't know if we have to take a philosophical position on that, but maybe what was your experience inside of Mongo? Like in the early days, was it more just like, let's see what can happen here? Or was it like, we think there's real value, let's extract value out of this?
Yeah. So, as a product leader, I firmly believe that the first thing you should do is look, if you want to make money, you have to look outside your company at what the market wants, right? If you build something cool, but nobody wants to use it, then you still have no money. You just sunk a bunch of money into it. So first of all, like look at what people want. And then you should have a very clear idea as to like what the market wants before you start building. So there's that piece, right? That being said, it is very true that, as we work on something, it evolves. And so I have seen pretty good ideas sometimes not receive enough investment for them to be good enough, right? Like, so to, use an example I think everybody would understand, like what if when Henry Ford built a car, he decided he wasn't going to put wheels on it because he had run out of money? Right. So maybe the car would have eventually gotten there, but it would have definitely taken longer for the market to like seize upon the value and see it. So there are crucial things that have to exist that you have to put that investment in to get a project to market. Right. So it may be true that the level of monetary investment is much smaller than you imagine, though. Like I've seen really incredible things take place with just 2 good engineers.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You take 2 really talented people and you just sort of hand wave in the air and they come back in a few weeks with something incredible. So
right. I think the metaphor that I often see for this is like, we talk about MVPs, right? It's just like we want to build the full skate deck and not just the wheels, right? Like you actually can't like you can't envision the skateboard without all the constituent parts. Now it might not be the most, the fanciest the skate deck you need, but at least you've got the functional.
Yeah.
component.
I mean, that being said, though, I do think there's, it is real that like if you're a business and you're a company, ultimately, like even if you were lucky enough to get millions of dollars investment, that money does eventually run out unless you have a monetization plan. So if unless you're just doing it for the good of the community, right? You're going to build something really interesting and fun and open source, and you're never going to have any expectation of profit. But, maybe you can do that. But if you can't do that because you have investors, you have runway, then you need a monetization plan. So you need to build something that people are willing to pay for.
Got it. I am fully aligned with that message. All right. Another question here from Richard. Thanks, Richard, for this. Red teaming. So what exactly do you mean by manually followed up on, right? And so I think we were talking about, we deployed, 50, 100 people at this problem, and anything that didn't look right, we manually followed up on. Can you just, we'll pull on that thread a little bit. Tell me more about that process.
Yeah. So for the chatbot specifically, what we do is you ask a question, it gives you an answer, and then it gives you 3 sources of information, right? That is what it is. That's what it's coded to do. It gives you 3 sources of information. And then you say, as the user, your answer sucks. So we flag that, right? We have a thumbs down. So we have a way that the user can flag that. We can obviously like follow up because we have a running log of every question asked and every single answer given. So we can follow up anytime, right? But when we do that, we look at the reference information that it gave, as well as searching on that topic ourselves by hand. So for instance, it gave you an answer and then one of the reference links isn't real. We check out what it is alluding to. That is only possible when you have domain experts.
Got it.
Right? That's the key piece, right? If I had just taken a random Node.js engineer, they would not know if that information was accurate or if the user was misinterpreting the information or if the reference the given was real.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you think that, like, did you often find, and maybe I'm going too deep here, but did you often find that the issue was in the source data, or was it the context maybe that was handed to the LLM for eval? Like, where did the problem most often sit?
Yeah, true. So there's and I'm not an expert on this topic, but it's definitely true that like the way that you have your embeddings or your vectors, like whether or not you choose to do per word or per sentence or per paragraph or per page makes a difference. I don't even pretend to understand what trade-offs are or where the current thinking is about.
Lots of knobs that you can turn to make this happen.
There are lots of knobs. But most often we found that the source information was incorrect. So then we can update the source information and try again, right? But we can also, tune some of those other knobs.
Sure. All right, great. I'm going to ask one last question here, the last couple minutes here. Eric had a question, maybe a technical question around feeding internal documents into the model. Did you have any restraining on it for accurate results? So I think we're saying, like, was there kind of a first pass that you maybe do internally before it was like, let's put this data in the model?
Yes.
So maybe a curation kind of.
We totally did, actually. So one of the things that we noticed right away is that you do have to have, this requires some amount of data cleanliness and hygiene before you really get started, right? So one of the things we noticed right away, so I'm talking about the MongoDB technical documentation. We have many, many products, and then most of those products have many, many versions. And so actually, it's not great at determining between versions, right? So if I want to ask a question about MongoDB 5.0, we're currently at MongoDB 7.0, it can't really determine very well. So sometimes it would be sort of like mixed bag. So our trade-off that we made was to only do the current documentation. All prior versions were thrown out. That means that we have sort of a limited doc set for our users to ask questions of. That was the trade-off that we made. Now, there's ways that you can probably improve that. And we did do that where you add the metadata underneath, which is like very explicitly per page calling out, this is MongoDB 5.0 documentation. And so you add like a layer of metadata that can make it easier for these, for the machines to sort through. But yeah, that's what we ended up doing.
That's interesting. My engineering brain started to immediately think about, like, and I'm sure many folks on the call, like, how would I solve that problem? Yeah, it's a fun one to tackle.
Yeah, we went with metadata, and so then we did sort of like programmatic additions of metadata.
Yep, for sure. Makes a ton of sense. All right, I think we'll call it good there. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. And Rochelle, special thank you to you for everything that you shared here today. I feel like I learned a lot, and I feel like I have some structure now around like how maybe I would actually go, from starting an AI function in my org, like what are the set of things that maybe I should consider? And we'll get those distributed out to folks that were on this call. So everyone here should receive an email with a recording to this session. Now, if you've got questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. You can find me, if you see my name here on the screen, I think it's showing up, Corey Wilkerson. That's also my Twitter. Should I say X now? X handle? No. It's hard for me to do.
I won't say it.
It's hard for me to do.
I'm still in denial. For everybody, in case you are interested in like sort of winging it and doing this on the weekend, our chatbot for our documentation is open source. It's available on GitHub, as well as an article on how we built it and our documentation as to how we built it. So if you're not busy this weekend, you have no problem.
Or find some time in the workday too.
Find some time in your workday. Yeah.
If you'd like to explore, or if you'd like to explore how Retool and MongoDB can help you ship AI apps to production, you can get a demo with us on or at retool.com/demo. We've done a ton of work with Mongo over the years. It's a premier partner in the Retool ecosystem. So please take a look at that. You can also get started and try out Retool for free by creating your account at retool.com. And we will wrap it there. And Rochelle, thank you very much again for your insight and wisdom.
Yeah.
And we will do this again sometime soon.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Cheers. Bye.
All right.